Morning Extra with Graham Stewart.
Good morning. Well, being the first Monday of the month, it's another of Morning Extra's investigations. Now, we're a stoical nation, strong in adversity. We don't cry because that's being weak. We just get on with things. Now, this Friday, it's World Mental Health Day, a day when people across the world will be encouraged to talk about their feelings in an effort to remove the stigma of mental health problems. But Scots are notoriously poor at expressing emotion, particularly young men. And as reporter Rich Preston has been finding out, the consequences can be desperate, with high rates in this country of violence, self-harm and suicide. Now, I'd like to hear your reaction to this documentary and your views on how we can change a culture of bottling up emotion and improve issues of mental health for young men. The number to call is 0500 92 95 00. Please be aware that you might find some of the content upsetting.
I go about smiling and everybody thinks I'm alright, but I'm not.
That was like a release for us, like when I cut myself, so I didn't feel anything. That's why I done it.
I used to really keep my own company. PlayStation's always been my best pal.
My way of dealing with things was through violence.
Did you ever speak to anyone?
Don't like speaking to anybody, man. It's my problems are my problems.
Were you quite bad at bottling things up then?
I was the best bottler you ever see, man. I bottled everything up.
Why?
It's a manly thing, I think we all try and save face around about other people, and it's just the way I was brought up, I think. The way the street is, the way it is out there.
I was really in a bad place and didn't want to feel the way I was feeling anymore. It was unbearable. So I tried to get help. The system's built, it fails people. They say they're going to help you and deliver on a lot of things and they don't.
My name's Rich Preston. I'm 23 years old and I've always been fascinated by radio, a medium that's all about talking and listening. But young males like me are notoriously bad at expressing ourselves. We pay a high cost perhaps. Last month, when Suicide Prevention Week was on the news, I was really shocked to hear that guys in Scotland in my age group, between 15 and 24, are more likely to die by their own hand than in a road traffic accident. In 2007, 57 died in a car or on a motorbike. 93 died by suicide, nearly 2 a week. Figures are falling slightly, but they're still higher than England and Wales. I found myself asking why. What's our problem? Is this because we don't think it's manly to openly express how we feel? And if we do, will anyone listen and help? In this Radio Scotland investigation, Dying to Talk, I've been asking those questions. Along the way, I've heard answers that tell about self-harm, violence, and the tragic loss of young life. I first spoke to Keir, who's 37 and now works as a volunteer with young people who have mental health issues. He's a lot older, but has a good idea of how they feel. Keir was 24 before he asked for help for himself, even though he now admits he'd known for a long time he had a problem.
But with hindsight, I think I kind of knew quite early. If I look back at, say, some stuff I wrote when I was 16, it's quite blatant about being depressed, but I didn't really understand what that meant and understand that I had problems that were worse than most other people and that I should go and get help for them till I was about 24. I just assumed that I didn't feel any worse than anyone else, so I was just being weak.
How bad did things get for you?
When I attempted suicide, thankfully I didn't complete it.
I've travelled up north to Inverness, where I'm at Milburn Academy, about to meet up with Emma Thomas from the Highland Users Group. Emma's been doing a lot of development work in schools with young people, trying to address the stigma of mental health issues and trying to encourage young people to be open and to talk about their feelings.
So groups of 3 or 4, get a pen and I'll bring the quiz around to you, okay guys? This is just to get you talking about mental health issues.
Now, the group that I saw you working with today, they were 5th years.
Yeah.
Now, for me, that would have been about 7 years ago, so relatively recently. And we never had any sort of education on how to deal with your emotional issues. Do you notice a difference between the response you get from girls and the guys?
Well, I remember doing one drawing exercise with a group of teenagers in one school, and I asked them to draw their image of somebody with a mental illness. And the girls did these very thoughtful, really kind of respectful, clearly constructed ideas about what how they might think, how they might feel, and how they might behave. Whereas the group of boys in one particular class, they chose schizophrenia. And it was this very violent image. There were limbs severed, blood all around, and very negative words like paedophile and axe murderer. And I've not had such a strong difference in the last few years, because I think there is much more work generally. But personally, I would like more suicide awareness work done with young people in schools.
What could that involve?
I think it's basic education about suicide, but even more importantly, how to respond to someone if they are suicidal. So it's looking at the warning signs, and then it's having the confidence to ask those very direct questions, giving people the opportunity to talk about it, so that the questions are, well, have you thought of completing suicide? If so, how? When do you intend to take your own life? Very simple questions, but questions that people find very difficult to ask, but they can save lives.
According to consultant psychiatrist Professor John Eagles at the Royal Cornhill Hospital in Aberdeen, the research around young male suicide suggests that young guys don't ask for psychiatric help.
If you look at the National Confidential Inquiry statistics, then they indicate that of all the people who died by suicide between 2000 and 2005, 28% of them had been in contact with psychiatric services within the preceding year. If you look at young males, however, only 20% of those who suicided under the age of 25 had been seen by psychiatric services during the year before that. So it does look as if preferentially young men who are in danger of suicide don't get as far as psychiatric services, and that may well relate to the fact that younger men don't come forward with their problems, don't present to general practitioners, maybe particularly when they're depressed. Because if there's one single thing which is linked to suicide, it's depression.
What are some of the symptoms of depression?
In terms of clinical depression, then the person who was suffering from that would tend to have a persistent general low mood. They would tend to have a loss of interest in things, and going along with that, a loss of enjoyment of previously enjoyable activities. They would often have disturbed sleep, their appetite may change, and their energy and motivation would usually be low. Negative and pessimistic thinking, which is the usual thinking pattern, and of course this can often lead to suicidal type thinking.
Going to your GP is the first step to take if you have the symptoms of depression. Maureen's much-loved son Philip is no longer here to tell about his own experience. He had drug and alcohol problems which may have started because he had been unable to resolve earlier psychological issues. Bravely, Maureen described for me what Philip was like as a child.
He was born in the springtime, and he was just a happy, lovely wee boy, and much wanted. And he grew up in a really loving, close family. Something traumatic, I believe, happened to Philip when he was 9. And at that time, I didn't realise that children could suffer from depression or related illnesses. And I was quite ignorant of that fact, which I really am so annoyed at myself with. I'll never forgive myself for that. If I would ask him what was wrong, he'd sort of brush it aside and shout at me and say nothing. And the bright, cheerful little boy had gone. He just wasn't there. I tried speaking to him on a lot of occasions, but I suppose being his mum, maybe he just didn't or couldn't tell me what was going on in his head. Anyway, as time went on, I realised that there was something seriously wrong with Philip, and he knew that there was something wrong as well.
Philip and his mum knew something was wrong, but could anyone have recognised the signs for suicide? Before we hear again from Maureen, here's Rory O'Connor, Professor of Psychology at the University of Stirling and co-president of the recent European Symposium of Suicide and Suicidal Behaviour.
If I was to say one thing which sort of characterises the suicidal mind, I would say it's hopelessness. This sense of despair, this sense of unbearable psychological pain. The person is caught in a state of entrapment. So caught in a situation which, no matter what they do to their mind, they can't get out of. So that may be a relationship crisis, or so they say they've had a huge row with their partner, or they feel they're worthless, and they just think that no matter what I do, things are not going to improve. If things aren't going to improve, why should I continue? I may as well end my life.
Is suicide preventable?
Suicide is difficult to predict. You will obviously get strong pointers in particular cases, but it's misleading to think that you can do it with 100% accuracy, because most certainly you can't. Just as you can't predict who of the people with angina is going to have a heart attack, you can't predict with any certainty which of your depressed patients may go on and complete suicide.
I remember one day, actually, he came down and I was in the kitchen, and I said, "Do you want a coffee?" And he just stood at the door and he says, hold on a minute. He said, "Mom, if anything ever happens to me," he says, "you'll be okay." And I looked at him, and because he had mentioned harming himself to me before, he says, "If anything happens to me, you'll be okay, because you'll know that I'll be safe." And I just thought, oh, this is terrible. Where do we go? Who can I speak to? Philip, by this time, he'd been going back and forth to the doctor for years. He did try. That's, why I get so angry, because Philip asked for help. He wasn't one of the statistics that never went to the doctor, that, never mentioned anything, but he just didn't get it. I went to work on the 4th of April to be asked to go into the office. And there was 2 police constables sitting there. I actually don't remember much. They had told me that Philip had been found that morning and he'd taken his life. And since then, it's been as if part of me's just been ripped away. There's not a day goes by I don't blame myself.
When Philip went to go to the doctors and asked for help, I mean, I'm 23, so I'm similar age to Philip, that I can't imagine doing that. I couldn't go to a doctor and say that, and just ask for help. And that must have been really hard for him. Was he ever offered any therapies in addition to his medication?
Not to my knowledge. No, he wasn't. There was an inquiry into Philip's care. The doctor that he was under did apologise to me. I was told that Philip sadly had slipped through the system. All they could say was that they were sorry. And we've got to start listening to these young people. They can be brave enough to speak out. We have to start listening.
I've come to Edinburgh, where I'm about to meet up with Nathan. Nathan is 24 years old and says that he's had psychological problems since the age of about 10. A couple of years ago, though, he just hit a crisis point. He couldn't feel good about himself, he was self-harming, and he attempted suicide on 2 different occasions. One thing that Nathan found, however, was that when he really needed help, it wasn't there. I'll let Nathan tell you his story.
I first got into the mental health system at about 10. I'd been really depressed and upset and stuff a lot when I was about that age. About my brother, because my brother Cole has cerebral palsy. Looking back now, I know I had my own stuff going on that I didn't really realise at the time. Anyway, one night I just got really upset and I tried to jump out the window, and my mum and dad had found me and were like, "Oh God," and we were really worried. So they referred me to the hospital, but I can't remember any of that. But I just remember going to see the psychiatrist. So I was doing all right for a while and stuff, and I still had, I still got down and stuff like that, but not as much as I had done before. And then I started cutting myself again about 16, because I'd self-harmed when I was a kid. And then I just kind of toodled on myself, struggling with things, really depressed, really suicidal, wanted to kill myself most of every day. I woke up wanting to die and went to bed wanting to die and was miserable all day in the middle. And I tried to kill myself a few times before I got any help, really. Any real help, anyway. But I guess I must have gone to the doctors after a while when I realised I was getting really down, and the GP just basically told me to go away and come back in a month if I was still feeling down. And by this point, I was self-harming really badly a lot, but that didn't seem to really mean anything to them. So I must have gone back to the GP and saw a different person this time, who's now my GP, and she's been absolutely fantastic. I've had the most support from her. She's just been incredible. I went on the waiting list for psychiatric support and everything, but again, that was a long time to wait, over 6 months or something. And then I saw someone twice, and then they left, and there was no one to replace her. So that was it. I was just dropped. Couldn't believe it.
Just like Philip, whose mother grieves for him every day, Nathan was asking for help, but had to wait. If life is unbearable, you don't want to stand in a queue. Here was another young male literally dying to talk, with no professional available to listen, and a family terrified about what he might do without that help. He'd been given medication and referred to the Cullen Centre, an outpatient psychotherapy unit in Edinburgh, which, as I said to Nathan, should have been good news, if it was there right away.
But that was an 18-month wait, I think I was on the waiting list for. I think it was harder for my family, the wait, than for me, because I was just I was in the middle of it all, but for them, they were just seeing me suffer and then seeing nothing getting done, and they just got so frustrated. It was so hard for them. If I was talking to my mum the other week, and she said the last time I tried to kill myself, they got taken into a room, and this community psychiatric nurse said, "Your son probably will kill himself. There's nothing we can do because the waiting list is too long. Just take him home and look after him."
How long ago was that?
About a year in June it was, because it was the day before Father's Day that I did it, and I had no idea it was the day before Father's Day. Not that any other day would have been better, but do you know what I mean? It just felt really bad. So I had been to, the psychiatrist and stuff like that, and I'd been on medication and everything, but I just wasn't getting anywhere with anything. And I was still waiting for the Cullen Centre, and I was kind of hoping that was going to... I was just holding out for that, but I just couldn't wait any longer. I was like, I'm fed up. I can't live like this anymore. I just had enough. And I know, they just must have been through so much. And I think it was a few weeks later, and if I didn't answer my phone straight away, they were really worried that I was dead or something. And somehow my phone must have accidentally called them, and then the line didn't close, so they couldn't get back in touch with me, and they thought something had happened, and they came round here, and it was 6 o'clock in the morning or something. I was total fast asleep, and when I opened the door, they were just sobbing, and they were totally distraught, and I feel really bad.
While Nathan was waiting to be seen by psychotherapists at the Cullen Centre, he found out about a group called Penumbra, one of Scotland's leading mental health organisations which provides support for adults and young people. He believes that's what kept him alive while he was on the 18-month waiting list for psychotherapy.
I went every week for an hour and a half, and it was the only time that all my family knew I was alright, because I was somewhere safe for an hour and a half. You don't have to talk about self-harm. You can talk about anything you want. It was a big part of helping me keep going with the holding out for the Cullen Centre. And then eventually a therapist came available at the Cullen Centre, Charlotte, and I started seeing her. Obviously it was a really long process and stuff, but things really started to move along after that.
What do you think it would have taken to get help through the health system?
Hurting someone else.
Nathan's belief that he'd have got help quicker by being found guilty of violent assault has shaken me. So my next stop is Pullman Young Offenders Institution, to talk to guys who are considered to be a danger to society. Have we failed to recognise that before that, they were a danger to themselves? In making this programme, I've asked psychiatrists and psychologists to describe the symptoms of depression. And although I have no training or expertise, it's beyond me to see why people like Jason slipped through the net.
My mental health problems started when I was about 11. And it's basically just severe depression.
How did you feel when you were depressed?
Just like crap, worthless. No point in anything. Dead pessimistic, negative. Didn't see the point in anything, doing anything. And I started drinking to block things out, to make it better. But obviously it was getting worse, and the longer it got, the more drink I was needed to block things out. And I started to self-harm. I started to self-harm about 10. I would just cut myself, because it would draw the pain out and then you could just watch it heal. It was like a release. I've tried to kill myself I don't know how many times, but that was my excuse for everything. If life got hard, I'll just kill myself. Like, as well, I would just go out and I'd pick fights with people and hope to get battered or done in, carry blades and stuff like that, hoping that somebody would do something to us.
How old were you about that time?
13, 14. Tried to jump in the Clyde as well.
Did you ever tell anyone how you were feeling?
I've had psychologists when I was about 5 or 6. They just basically said it was due to me being in care and stuff like that, and it was just unresolved anger issues, and there was nothing severe there. I mean, I was only actually officially diagnosed with depression until I came in here. Nobody actually done that outside. I never got as much help as I've had for the mental health in here.
What I heard from Jason wasn't unusual at Polmont. Tragic stories with terrifying implications. The statistics suggest that young men don't ask for help. But do they ever get as far as being counted? It will be hard to forget Scott's story of what sounds to me like emotional and psychological neglect.
When I was 6, my dad and my brother both died of massive heart attacks. After that, my mum sort of wrapped me up in cotton wool. I used to get bullied a lot because I didn't hit back, and that's what I was always told. And I used to get quite stressed out and upset about it. And whenever I tried to ask for help or that off my mum, she used to just say you're only 13, what you got to be stressed out about and that. And there was nobody else that I could really talk to. The school sent me to see folk, but that finished after I went to high school. And when I tried to get myself referred to see a psychologist or that, they just kept saying, you need to go and see this person. So I went to see them, and it was a case of, I'll need to put in a referral for a GP to see, and that'll take 2 weeks and that. So she passed me on to another guy, but he was just an arsehole, didn't really listen.
Why did you want to get help, first of all?
I don't know, I was lost. Last time I needed help, and the wife told me it was going to take 3 weeks to get a referral. I mean, I had a mental breakdown while I was on the phone to her. I mean, I just smashed the phone off the wall, lost the place, and started wrecking the kitchen. See, the thing is, I have to watch because, I've always bottled things up, and, when I get frustrated, I usually try to punch, furniture and that rather than folk. But when I get really frustrated, I mean, I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm not even thinking. I just lash out. It's easier for me in here because I can talk to the mental health team, my social worker and that. Just see when everything just gets on top of you, you just don't know what to do. It's difficult. Yeah, I've tried to talk myself a few times on the outside. I've tried to take ODs, and I've tried to hang myself. It doesn't work though. Usually somebody my mum comes in unexpectedly or that. Last time I tried to hang myself, two police guys seen me, cut me down and charged me with a breach of peace. Police never around when you need them. Bastards are always there when you're not wanting them.
Scott hasn't lost his sense of humour, but it's a bleak fact that guys like him have had to be locked up before they got any psychological support. The Scottish Government aims to reduce the suicide rate between 2002 and 2013 by 20%, supported by 50% of key frontline staff in mental health and substance misuse services, primary care and accident and emergency being educated and trained in suicide assessment. There's also a commitment to increase the availability of evidence-based psychological therapies by 2010. But unlike England and Wales, there's no specific financial investment for this. In February this year, south of the border, Health Secretary Alan Johnston unveiled a major new programme to train an extra 3,600 psychological therapists and announced a £170 million investment in therapies like CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, recognising it as being as effective as drugs. In Scotland, psychiatrists welcome the suicide prevention strategy here, but there's concern that England may poach the few therapists we have. Consultant psychiatrist Dr Tom Brown is chair of the Scottish division of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. He looks with envy at the £170 million being invested into psychological therapies down south.
The sum that has been invested up here is derisory compared to that. There's a real issue there, and I suppose that's one of my worries with the huge investment that was announced earlier in the year south of the border. In the last decade, we've trained a fair number of CBT therapists in Scotland, and I'm in fact a trainer on one of the courses, so this is something I know a wee bit about. One of the problems has been that many of them have gone back to their jobs, having been trained in CBT, but their job plans not changed in a way that would allow them to use the skills they've acquired. So, if you like, we've wasted some of that training. We've got a long way to go when it comes to ensuring equity of access to psychological therapies. And I think at this stage it's not encouraging. Despite that being one of the commitments in the mental health delivery plan, the investment in that so far has not been encouraging. They've not really invested in that. They want us really to do it within the current resource, and it's not doable.
Consultant psychiatrist Professor John Eagles agrees.
We can do the medication at the moment. That's relatively cheap and readily accessible. But if there was one improvement in psychiatric services, I think we'd all like to see it as an increased provision of psychologically trained therapists.
As we heard earlier, Nathan was lucky enough to get that psychotherapeutic help. It's now 6 months since he's tried to self-harm.
I'm actually glad that I'm still alive. I feel pretty lucky for that. I still get down and I still think about cutting myself. I still think about self-harming quite a lot. Every time I want to do it now, I just think I don't do that anymore. That's not me anymore, don't do that. And it gets easier not to do it. But yeah, I definitely feel better. I'm not in hell anymore, and I definitely was before.
But Maureen's son Philip is gone, leaving behind unquantifiable grief, guilt and loss for his mum, family and his friends.
I just can't believe that he did it, because I don't think that he ever said to them that's the way he was feeling. But they keep in contact. Even if, I'll be sitting at night and a wee text will come through, hope you're okay, just thinking about Phil.
Dying to Talk is a Stark production for BBC Radio Scotland. Well, I'd like to hear your reaction to this documentary and your views on how we can change a culture of bottling up emotion and improve issues of mental health.